Senator Andrews, I appreciate what you're saying, and it's very encouraging. We need a spokesman. What we have as a Republican Party in this country is we have a spokesman who we can all look to, who we know two things about. He loves this country, and he has our back. We don't have that in Colorado. That's what we need. And when you talk about what's changed, remember 2 years ago, and I don't remember whether it was Amendment 60 or Resolution 60 or Proposition 60, which was single-payer health care. It was defeated by over 60% of the vote. And yet now we have a governor who is run on that issue and was overwhelmingly, I shouldn't say overwhelmingly, 7 or 8 points elected.
Yeah.
So we need a spokesman. And I suppose it could be the Centennial Institute, but that's my concern with what's happening in our party, is we don't have that person. Help us. What shall we do? Where can we go? Who can we look to that we can say, okay, you speak for the conservative message. Does our party even have a conservative message? And if so, what is our conservative message? Jared Polis started this campaign 2 years ago by putting an infrastructure in place in every county in the state. He had $25 million, God bless him. Interestingly, he earned it in the capitalistic system, which now he hates, but it's a whole different, that's a different issue. So I'm going to give the microphone up and leave you with that question.
Well, now, John Anders ran for governor once before. I think we could get him back out there to run again, right?
Oh, Jeff, I can't. I have a chronic condition. It's called being born in 1944. Thank you. You're very kind. You know, we're going to have to see who steps forward to pick up the fallen flag. It's a great question, and I think you put your finger on something that will be needed to rally in the short term around legislative battles that will come in the spring, and in the longer term to get us ready to compete again in 2020 and 2022. Does George Brockler turn the page? He almost ran for governor this time. Of everybody that was running this cycle, Brockler is the best messenger. He can fire up an audience. And maybe to give you another name, and I don't think it's going to go this way, but conceivably Mike Kaufman wishes he had run for governor instead of running yet again in a district that they'd stacked against him to defeat him, and they finally defeated him on the fourth try. Mike Kaufman has been Mr. Republican in this state for a quarter century. Does he still have some political juice left in him? Right now, he's licking his wounds, and he's probably feeling pretty exhausted. We owe Mike a debt of gratitude for representing us so well in Washington over the last 10 years. Even when we disagreed with his vote, nobody else could have held that district as well as he held it. Those are two names, Brockler, Kaufman. Who else comes forward? I don't know. I like Dan Kaplis on the radio. He's back on the radio officially as of this week. Dan has had the itch to run for public office for a long time. He's on KHOW in the afternoons at 4 with Krista Kafer. It remains to be seen. There's two things in my notes that I failed to voice a moment ago for us to keep in mind. As we absorb a real thrashing that Republicans took in Colorado and some disappointments that we took across the country, although it was much more mixed, as both Frank and Hadley pointed out. But here in Colorado, remember these two things. Adversity is opportunity, and success is temptation. And so for our side, defeated but not thrown in the gulag or put before a firing squad, we can compete again. And we have the opportunity of our adversity, of being driven into the wilderness and see what voices come forward to begin to lead us and rally us and develop the themes and get it down to the kind of basic, visceral connect with lots and lots of people who never thought of themselves before in our camp, such as President Trump has done so masterfully for whatever are his shortcomings. So adversity is our opportunity. And meanwhile, for the other guys, as I've said several times, success is their temptation. You just watch. It's going to turn. The details remain to be seen.
Great. Next question. We'll go back over here. Mr. Brandon Yates, CCU.
Thank you very much.
Student.
It is. Thank you very much. My name is Brandon Yates. I'm a senior at CCU, and my question goes to the issue of persuasion. So I think you're very insightful to point out that when it came to candidates, Colorado broke very hard blue, but when it came to the ballot propositions, they broke very hard red. I was very grateful in particular to see 112 go down in flames. So how do we orient voters, especially millennial voters, my peers, to focus on issues and ideas as opposed to candidates and personality? Thank you.
Go ahead.
That's the million-dollar question. I think this year was a $5 billion question. I think our congressional elections were the most expensive in history. Oh, man. We've got some issues with young voters and with female voters, with unmarried voters. And part of the problem is that the focus has been on personality. And while many people in this room may be very much enthused about our current president, he's unique, and he's a unique political variable. For Republicans to try to assemble a coalition that is not the Trump coalition during a year like this one, only 2 years after the president has won, and mind you, Colorado even, before President Trump clinched the nomination. I mean, I was there. I caucused at my neighborhood level and my district level, and I went to Colorado Springs for the state caucus. Were other people there? Mm-hmm. Okay, there was not a lot of pro-Trump support. There were a few people, but the overwhelming sentiment among Republicans in Colorado in 2016, before he was the nominee, was pretty negative on Donald Trump. And this is a challenge, not just here in Colorado, but nationwide, with younger voters, with voters of color, and with female voters. And I think we just have to focus on not just explaining the principles of our ideas, but for the skeptic, we have to focus on the results of our ideas. And that's easy to do with the economy. It's harder to do in other areas where Republicans haven't had the opportunity to implement the policies that we want to do. But I think if you're a skeptic and we're saying, just trust us because our ideas are right because they're based on natural law and they're based on other things that people may not know about or agree with us about, it's harder to make the argument. It's easier to win the argument and persuade people, I think, when you can say, look at what has happened. Whether it's a bad policy, and we can look at single-payer healthcare systems or socialized medicine, in other parts of the world, or whether it's the right moves that I believe Republicans have made on the economy here in the United States. We have to focus not just on the ideas and the principles that undergird them, but the results that follow them.
And I think, Hannah, the other important point that you made that struck me is we need to meet people where they are. Mm-hmm. We need to talk to them about the issues that they care about. As conservatives, as Republicans, we want to convince. I want to convince, but I think we need to take a step back and understand that we need to do a better job of meeting people where they are on the issues that they care about, and then visiting with them about opportunities to help improve their condition, regardless of what those issues might be, but talking to them about those issues and meeting them where they are.
I'm going to make one more comment. I hope this doesn't get me in trouble with this audience, because I have the same worldview and agree with everybody on this panel. Everybody should be judged by the content of their character, nothing else. But when I received the mailer explaining who I should vote for the Republican slate in Colorado, it was all white men. And I don't think that should be the most important thing. I don't even think it should be the thing. But the left has been pretty successful convincing people that identity politics is the thing, and that their brand is inclusivity. And if you look at the results from this election, who's headed to Washington, who's headed to represent people, especially people with D's after their name, it's a pretty diverse crowd. And we do have a lot of diversity in conservative circles, not necessarily running for office, but maybe that's an area of adversity that we can turn into opportunity and recruit more candidates who look like the rest of America, because we have them. We have a lot of conservatives who look like the rest of America. We have a lot of diversity on our side when it comes to not just ideas, but all those other demographic characteristics. But getting those people to be our spokespeople and our representatives, I think, will be a challenge, but an important thing for us to try to do.
As a white guy who's had his name on the ballot, I agree with you.
Teresa.
That mailer is going to go in the Hall of Fame of bad political marketing, Hadley.
Teresa Seidbotham from Teleus Law. You talked about a number of initiatives, and some of them are blatantly unconstitutional. Do we have plans to take these battles into the courts?
What are you thinking of that's unconstitutional?
Well, we've talked about potential Second Amendment violations. We've talked about some serious First Amendment religious liberty violations. We've talked about limitations on commercial speech potentially, the mental health stuff, parental rights with 14th Amendment. I mean, I could go on.
Well, I was misled when you said initiatives. I was casting my mind backward to what we just decided on the ballot. You mean legislation that could be brought in 2019? Yeah.
Right, as you're talking about the initiatives that will be brought, do we
Well,
identify them?
our friends at Independence Institute have a law center that is gearing up to litigate issues like that. It's not as well resourced as it needs to be, but it's the beginning. Around for a long, long time and doing heroic work, mostly on land use, environmental, and energy issues, based here locally, a couple miles from here, Mountain States Legal Foundation. Religious liberty issues, CCU has had to think about defending its own identity for several years now, and is very well wired in with Alliance Defending Freedom out of Phoenix and with the Beckett Fund out of Washington, D.C. So the opportunity exists to litigate some of these things. You can't litigate what hasn't been legislated. They talk about ripeness, of course, and so the time has got to come, but when the time comes, we're not empty-handed. Jeff, you could probably elaborate on that.
I think that's a need in Colorado, and I think the attorneys need to be ready, and if they're willing to put forth volunteer opportunities to help fight these cases, I think that's going to be very important. So I don't know if the Federalist Society is that strong here in Colorado. I've been to a few of their events, but we need a community of conservative lawyers that are going to stand by and do the work. I'm not an attorney. I'm married to an attorney. But we need help in that space, and I think having a good community of lawyers is going to be very important. So Christian Legal Society, Federalist Society, I think they need to be ready. I think you're exactly right, Teresa. Back there, sir. Hold on real quick for the microphone.
Thank you. I'm J.B. Wasotsky, and my question is regarding the fact that 4 years ago, Coloradans voted for a Democrat governor, but they voted for 3 Republicans for Secretary of State, Treasurer, and AG. And this time, even with, I think, amazingly qualified and appealing candidates like Wayne Williams, George Brockler, and Brian Watson, Coloradans didn't split their ticket. They went for all Democrats. I was wondering what your thoughts are about that.
It wasn't the same Coloradans who were voting. You know, the Coloradans who voted 4 years ago and who turned out is different, is what I'm saying. And the Democrat wave, I mean, this is a typical thing for the president's party to lose seats in a midterm, but these folks were really fired up. The folks on the left were really fired up, and they captured a lot of, as you mentioned, Frank, unaffiliated votes in Colorado as well. So I would just say that, you know, maybe the voters who voted 4 years ago thought the same thing and agreed with you about the candidates, but there were other people voting this time too, and that's what I think made the difference. That's my analysis.
So you think it's who turned out to vote this time versus 4 years ago?
I would be interested, and I haven't seen any analysis on this yet. I'd be interested to know how much of a turnout driver the Y and Z fair maps proposals were. I favored them, and I think we're going to be very glad when we face an all-Democrat state government in 2021 that we have Y and Z with a fairly random and blind approach to drawing maps that are going to give our side, Republicans, a much better chance. But it's quite possible that the unaffiliated voter turnout spiking in Colorado this year was in part due to the heavy, heavy promotion of Y and Z and the new feature whereby unaffiliateds have got 1/3 of the seats on each of these two 12-member commissions, 4R, 4D, and 4U. There's a guy named Kent Thiry who is president of the DaVita kidney dialysis healthcare giant. He wants to be governor. He almost ran this cycle. Frank, don't you think he has his eye on it in the future? If not governor, some job.
Yeah,
Now, the
I do.
governor's job is occupied for 4, arguably 8 years. Hope not 8. But Thiry is Mr. Unaffiliated Empowerment in Colorado. It was by his initiative and dollars and organizational drive that the opening up of the primaries was passed with 108 and 109 2 years ago. That I think is not a good idea, but it's a coming thing of the future. There is a new virtual, unorganized, unled political party in Colorado called the U's. In my county of Arapahoe, they're by far the biggest power. It might be true in Jeffco and elsewhere across the state. And they're coming, and this guy, Kent Thiry, is someone to keep your eye on.
All right. Barb. Hold on, we got the microphone. You're right in the middle, so they got to figure out which one's coming.
Thank you. I'm Barb Monarch with Colorado Family Action, and my question is, have you looked yet at how much the Republicans were outspent and where the Democrat money came from? Because we are not a self-enclosed state. We are being influenced by progressives all over the nation, and we are the testing ground to launch this
Yeah, so
in other
true.
states.
I think that's something to be seen here soon. I talked to Walker Stapleton this morning about being outspent. I mean, and it could be anywhere from 6 to 1 to 8 to 1 on what the Democrats outspent Republicans on. So that'll be analysis to come soon. But I think it's important to watch that. We've all a lot of us are familiar with the blueprint, which is this idea that some handful of people with a lot of money can shape the state. I think we're continuing to see that, and we need to be wary of what type of influences they're trying to bring, special interests that they're trying to bring here. Back there in the back, we'll do last question.
Give me that mic. Give me that mic.
Not to Randy. Randy's all right. Randy's already got a show.
You've mentioned education as being an issue.
Yes.
Good point to that is that gal on The View who saw that they lost the U.S. Senate because of gerrymandering. But education is a big issue, and particularly in the next generation behind us. And I wonder tonight, real quick, are there any pastors in the room? Anybody pastors at church? Thank you. My work is to communicate with the pastors who speak to more people on any given weekend than anybody else in the country. And so I guess I want help in putting that in people's mind as to how they can talk to their pastor and work to get education into the church, to talk about worldview, biblical worldview, because in the church we're woeful in that area, and really bring civics in one way or another to the church. And then we begin to have a conversation with pastors, because in the congregations are righteous men and women who we need running for office, right?
Yep.
And then, if Polis raised up organizations or offices in every county, 64 counties in Colorado, I think there's more communities peppered throughout these counties than anything else, and we can work through the churches to make those communities righteous one by one, networking across the state and changing the landscape here. I want to push that out. That's the work I do at the Family Research Council, is work with pastors in this Watchmen on the Wall initiative. And just put that in your minds out there. How can we get to the pastors, bring the pastors around tables in counties across the state and begin this process of education?
And you're exactly right. I think there's a real problem with pastoral engagement on the civic issues that we're facing. I'll give you a great example. Pastors every Sunday are telling their congregation, you need to live your faith 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no matter where you are. You need to practice your faith. This is not something that just happens on Sunday. So Jack Phillips runs a business, and he practices that. And Jack Phillips is drugged before the state of Colorado. He loses 40% of his business. He engages in a 6-year legal battle that culminates with a 7-2 victory at the U.S. Supreme Court, and there were almost no pastors standing by his side. That's a real problem. It was ADF, it was groups like Family Research Council, but we've got to get that type of engagement, and pastors need to recognize that that the people that are sitting in their seats are facing real challenges from this government that's seeking to restrict religious freedom, and they need to have a strong voice. John?
Say your name, sir.
Randy Wilson.
Yeah, Randy, would you just stay there by that door and let folks, after we adjourn, come on up and give you their contact information if they want to help you network into their churches?
That would be great.
Yeah, let's go see Randy when we
Yeah.
finish, friends.
Absolutely.
Can I share one anecdote about this? Because I was driving through Denver, this was during the Kavanaugh hearings, and I drove past a church, I kid you not. Their church bulletin sign, and this was obviously a left-leaning church, said, "Believe women." And I had to go back because I thought, surely this is about Mary Magdalene. I thought like, surely this is like, there's a Bible verse underneath it or something, and this is just a clever way for this church. No, it was a political statement. And I was so disheartened and I think a lot of people are turned off by the idea of having politics in our churches. But I think that there's a way to do it right, and I appreciate your work, Randy. But I just wanted to share that because I thought it blew my mind that the churches on the left don't seem hesitant at all to tell people what political views to espouse.
Adam believed Eve, and it's all been downhill from there, Hadley.
We're gonna close here, but I want to do one last thing here. We have our positions, we have our policies, and they're important to us, and we fight in the public square for them. But when someone raises their hand to run for office, they embody those positions, and they go forth and they receive a tremendous amount of hate, of people that rip apart their lives, their families, their careers. They look for ways to bring them down in every possible way. It is very hard to run for office. Do we have anybody that ran for office in this last election? Stand up. Stand up. Let's give them a round of applause. We need more people like you. So thank you for fighting for the values that we care so deeply about and putting yourself out there for that. That is not easy.